খুলে বা জনসমাজে তুমি সকলের শিরোমণি প্রেম ভক্তি রসোন্মত্তা অদ্বৈত সেব্য পদম নিত্যানন্দ প্রিয়তম সর্বভক্ত মনোরম। হে প্রাণের দেবতা, আমি অদ্বৈত তোমার শ্রী চরণ কমল সেবনায় প্রেম উন্মত্ত হয়েছি। তবুও তুমি নিত্যানন্দের প্রিয়তম এবং সকল ভক্তগণের মনোবাঞ্ছা পূর্ণ করো। ভক্তরাদ্যং ভক্তি সাধ্যং ভক্তরূপিণমীশ্বরং শ্রীনিবাসাদি ভক্তাগ্রহে স্তূয়মানং সার্বভৌমাদিবীর বেদ শাস্ত্র অগম্য বিষয় নাই। হে প্রভু, তুমি ভক্তিতে প্রাপ্য, ভক্ত পরাধীন ও ভক্ত অভীষ্টারী শ্রী পরমেশ্বর শ্রীবাসারি ভক্তবৃন্দ এবং সর্বভৌমাদি বেদ অগম শাস্ত্র মহাপণ্ডিত মণ্ডলী নিরন্তর স্তুতি দ্বারা তোমাকে আরাধনা করেন। অতএব আমিও তোমার শ্রী চরণ কমল নিত্য বন্দনা করি। In 1969, I first came to India, and I went straight to Rishikesh. And because, why? I had read this book. It's a good book. It's the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. There's a place where I used to go surfing in California called Swami's. And it's there. Paramahansa Yogananda had an ashram there. I didn't know anything about him at that time. But later on, when I went to Hawaii to go surfing in Hawaii, I read his book, the autobiography of a yogi, and something like transcendental meditation, something like that. And I became inspired to search after Indian religion through his book. You know, yogis and, you know, meditating in the Himalayas and doing all sorts of astonishing things, you know. They had supernatural powers and all these things. So when I first came to India in 1969, I went straight to Rishikesh and I booked myself in an ashram. It was called Sadananda Ashram, I think. And there was one yogi all the hippies used to go to. His name was Dhyanananda. He had a little hermitage right by the Ganga. He lived in a thatched hut. And he would do meditation all day in this thatched hut. And then he would come out around 4 in the afternoon and give his pravachan. And he would speak in English to a whole crowd of hippies. I was also amongst them. And it was very flowery, his discourses. And then it started getting cold. You know, so I thought I'd go to Goa. I went to Goa, and then from there, I spent Christmas in Goa, and then from there I went to Madras, and then up to Hyderabad, and then I went to Bombay and booked myself a freighter to Africa. But the freighter wasn't going to leave for another 2 months, another month. So I decided, in this jaunt, let me go to Benares. There I met this guy who smoked a chilam. He was a sadhu. And he said, I'll open your third eye. Fly with me to Kathmandu. And so the guy, he took me to Kathmandu, and he got drunk, and he stole my money. Anyway, I ended up back, and I got on the freighter and went to Mombasa, and then I toured Africa. Anyway, after going back to where I started in Hawaii, it was 1971. I was surfing. I loved surfing in my teenagehood, you know. One of the best surfing breaks in the whole world is called Honolulu Bay. It's on the island of Maui. The island of Maui is like a woman's head and bust, the shape of the island. And at the very top of her, you know, there's a moon crater. And at the bottom of the moon crater, there's this bay, Honolulu Bay, and beautiful breaks come off this coral reef. So I had a cave there. And when the surf was up, I would go out surfing. And then I had food stamps from the government. I'd go into Lahaina and buy groceries and stuff, and I'd come back to my cave. And then one day, when I was going into the Lahaina to buy groceries, I met Siddha Swarup. And his name wasn't Siddha Swarup then, he was called Sai. And he invited me to their feast. And so I thought, well, why not? And I went to their feast, and the first time I had halava. And all the things that they you know, sweet rice and puris, all those sort of things. And you see, the leader of the group in those days was a guy named Gaur Sundar. He was the temple president. And not of Maui, but in the main center in Oahu, it was McKinley Street. Him and Govinda Dasi were in charge there. And he came to Maui to put on this festival. And it was on the beach. And there was a little, like, pavilion, you know. They had a rock and roll Hare Krishna. And they're pretty good. I remember the bass player, his name was Vaikanas. And one of the lead singers was Balabhadra. Gaur Sundar was also singing. He was a double Scorpio. He had very deep eyes. He looked very mesmerizing, you know. And so I after attending that first festival, I thought they invited me to the temple, so I went there. And after a few days, the news was that Prabhupada was coming to Oahu, to the main temple. And so they invited me to go, so I went. And during the 3 days that Prabhupada was there, we heard him lecture, and then he put on a special lecture somewhere in downtown Honolulu at some place, you know, and we went there. And we were doing Sankirtan down in Honolulu, on the Sankirtan in the streets, I remember those days. And then when Prabhupada left, he went on. I went back to my cave in Maui to go surfing again. Someone had stolen my surfboard. The money I had hidden under the rock was also gone. So I thought, what am I going to do, you know? I joined the temple. From the Association of Devotees and from Prabhupada's association, a desire awoken in me to see Vrindavan. So what I did is I got myself a job working on a water well, drilling water, you know, and for a month I had enough money for my ticket. So from there I flew back to my mother's house in California, and from there I hitchhiked across America to New York, And that's when the New York temple was really booming. It happened to be, when I arrived there, it was a Sunday feast. And Jadurani cornered me. And she found out somehow that I'd learned I could paint a little bit. So she took me and said, and she gave me a picture of Prabhupada. I said, can you paint this, you know? Because during that time, I was getting my ticket to go to India. I was getting my visa together. All these things were, I was working out, and I was staying at the Brooklyn Temple. It was really nice in those days. Very nice. And I was working as an artist. It was for about a week's time. And then what they were trying to do, Jadurani, when she found out that I'm going to India, she tried to stop me. She said, and then she arranged that Bali Mardon, who was in charge at that time, he called me up to his room and he said, it's Maya to go to India. You just surrender to the temple and we'll let you do painting, you know. He was telling me like that. We'll let you paint. And I thought to myself, I'm not gonna stay here. I want to go to India. That's why the whole purpose is. So I had to sneak out of the temple, and I got on the plane, and I arrived in Delhi. And immediately I got on a train to Mathura. And I arrived in Mathura just as the sun was going down. I met some Marwari guy. He showed me Krishna's Janmastan. He showed me Bishram Ghat. And then that night I slept in a field. The next day I got on a bus. I arrived in Vrindavan. First time. It was so transcendental. It was really in 1972. Vrindavan was a very beautiful, quaint village. And there was still a lot of trees and forest around. A lot of peacocks, a lot of monkeys, a lot of parrots. And the atmosphere, the mood there was very beautiful. And the day I arrived, Prabhupada arrived. He was going to spend the whole month, Kartik, in Vrindavan. And I arrived the same day in the morning, and he arrived in the afternoon. And when he arrived at the Radha Damodar temple, there was no Krishna Balaram temple in those days. Obil Kapoor greeted him. And there was a greeting ceremony. I remember that. And at that time, there was a guy named Gunardeva who was in charge of building the Krishna Balaram temple. I remember during that time, Prabhupada laid the cornerstone. And we were staying at Keshi Ghat. There was a place called Lakshmi Ram Kunja. Beautiful. It was a sandstone structure, 3-story building, Raj Palace. And I was staying up in the 3rd story, overlooking the Jamuna. And I remember chanting on top of the roof there, beautiful view of the Jamuna and everything. You know who was in charge of the Brahmachari ashram was Malati, Shamsundar's wife. So she was telling all the boys what to do. Shamsundar was there, and in charge of the Radha Damodar temple was Jamuna and Gurudas. Jamuna and Gurudas. And Prabhupada was giving lectures. I think it was Srimad Bhagavatam in the morning and Nectar Devotion in the afternoon. And in those days, ISKCON was just starting. And I remember the lectures were right in front of Rupa Goswami's Bhajan Kutir. Bhajan Kutir and Samadhi. In those days, everything was dust, earth, you know. And so my seva was that before Prabhupada would lecture, I would sweep the whole area, and I'd put down a sataranji, you know, the carpet for the devotees to sit on, and I'd arrange Prabhupada's place for where he would sit, a little table, and then when everything was ready, I would go and call Prabhupada. And then when Prabhupada would get up, I'd take the pillow that he was sitting on, and I'd run ahead and I'd put it down where he's going to sit. And then when he would lecture, I'd take a peacock fan and fan him. I loved doing that. That was my daily seva. But that month was very exciting. It was, I think, the most exciting month I've had in my whole ISKCON career. I never had any position either. I was a nobody. I never got higher up, you know. If I would have been higher up, who knows what it would happen. Prabhupada was there the whole month, and everyone had free access to go into his room anytime they felt like it, you know. He was going on morning walks, and everyone could go on the morning walk. At noon, practically every day, there was an invitation to some one day where Prabhupada was invited for lunch, and we would also go. In the evening, he would give programs at different temples, and we would also accompany him. I remember Prabhupada and Shruti Kirti were going along on a rickshaw, and I jumped on the back of the rickshaw. Prabhupada looked back and smiled. It was a very beautiful atmosphere in those days. A very relaxed mood, you know. And I remember when I got initiated that month, and just before I got initiated, there was a guy named Lokanath. You know, he's become Lokanath Swami now. He took initiation just after me. And then Guru Kripa and Yashodanandan got sannyas. I remember that. I forget the other things. But I became initiated in 1972 in front of Rupa Goswami's Samadhi. And then Prabhupada gave me this job. I think this is the very same mala that he chanted on. Yeah. It's inspiring. You know, you see, because later on, he came to Hawaii, and I was fanning him them after the lecture. Prabhupada, it was time for questions and answers, you know. So I wanted to ask him, the question I had in mind was, after chanting 16 rounds, can we chant the Panchatattva mantra, you know, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Can we chant this in our japa after 16? So as I started to ask the question, I said, Prabhupada, after we finished chanting 16, he said, we never finished chanting. And so I didn't get to ask him my question. So I started to answer again. I said, Srila Prabhupada, after we finished chanting our 16, he said, we never finished chanting. We never finished chanting. And then I took it as a personal instruction that chanting is the essence. You know, and I feel, and in the Gita it says, Jagyanang Japo Jagyosmi, that all the Jagyas, Japa, I am Japa, Krishna says to Arjuna, of all the Jagyas, I am Japa. So Prabhupada gave me the instruction to always chant. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm chanting 3 lakhs here under this tree. This is my best friend. His name is Kailash. He's a Kalpa Briksha. I hope someday he will award me Gauranga's darshan. Is that enough? Oh yeah, there's many more stories, but we'll save them for later. Isn't that enough? This is enough for a starter. If you want to come back someday and we'll discuss more, but I've told you the essence of it. Like when Prabhupada left his body, I was the closest to him of all the devotees in the world. I had that special privilege. I was this close to him. He was lying on the bed. And the next closest person to him, who was standing up just like you are, I was kneeling down. He was lying on the bed, and the person who was leading the kirtan at his feet was Bhardraj. You know Bhardraj? He was a very good singer. And his bosom friend, his doctor friend from Allahabad, who he called to take care of him in his last days. He was standing there, and he looked at his watch and said that his time is up. You know, Prabhupada left his body through his mouth. I saw the light, a goose, leave his body like that. That was very nice. Yeah.